Namaste dear students. In this video we'll be discussing natural rights versus legal rights. At the very outset, we should understand that natural rights or legal rights are not some different set of rights we are talking about like civil rights or political rights. These are two dominant approaches to the study of rights per se. And these particular approaches to rights dominated the arena of political theory for nearly 3 centuries, from 17th century to 19th century. This debate is primarily a reflection of the manifestation of the conflicting ideas of legal institutional approaches and normative approaches. Normative approaches, later which was translated or transformed into classical liberalism, talked about an individual which is beyond the control of the state, or rather state being a necessary evil is there to take care of the rights of the individual. So that is why natural rights theorists or advocates of natural rights, the classical liberals, they talked about that individual cannot be pressurized by the state or by whoever in the society. And legal institutionalists, they on the other hand argued that state is the primary actor in ensuring the rights to the individual. So this debate is basically revolving around the importance or action of the state between individual rights and their actualization in the society. Natural rights versus legal rights, these we can understand with two very catchy examples. First example, under the British rule in India's freedom, we find a very common understanding, that is Swaraj is our birthright. When we said it, we were under the legal or political control of the Britishers. So legal institutional approach would argue that no, you have no right against the Britishers. You have no right to go for a rebellion or a revolution or a freedom struggle, since your right, whatever you have, if at all, these are being given by the British authority. So you cannot go against it. But natural rights advocates would rather support the Indians' view that this is our land and we have every right to self-rule. So, on one particular incident, we can understand that these two different approaches to the question of right give us two different opinions about it. The next example we can find in today's Iran, when women are protesting against hijab. Natural rights advocates would argue that hijab is a kind of obstacle, and whatever they are arguing, women in Iran, that it is an obstacle. So we have every right to choose or give up this hijab. But legal rights activists would argue that since this is the law, you have to abide by it. It's not your choice. And if you do not wear hijab, it's violation of law, and you have no right against the state, or you have no right to say that we are not going to wear hijab. So we can conclude one thing from this particular two examples, that natural rights talk about a universal conception of right beyond the control of the state, whereas the legal rights activists, they argue that it's specific to the territorial limitations of the state, and state is the real custodian of right. State gives you right. State gives right to individuals. So individuals are not beyond state, and if there is no state, there is no right. We'll elaborate it now. Let's first of all talk about natural rights and its key arguments. Natural rights advocates, they start from your birth, and it argues that with your birth you earn some rights. So it's not about earning some other traits or any other features in your life. So in any random movies or even at the time of India's freedom struggle, we have seen it's a very common statement that Rights are not given, these are snatched if needed or taken. But natural rights advocates, they would argue that these are neither given nor needed to be taken. It's already there. It's your intrinsic properties with your along with your birth. It's like an extended abstract condition of you. You do not need to snatch it. You do not need to, and no one is there to give you. No one can take it away. And their argument is, if it's not given to you by whoever, maybe by your fellow citizens or by the state or by any other organizations, since it is given to you by the nature, these organizations around you cannot take it away. So that is why these are natural rights, and these do not need any justification. These are self explanatory. You do not need to explain that why natural rights are important. So natural rights advocates, they argue that since it is given by nobody, no one has any right to take it away from you. And it is your natural right to pursue your happiness, your life, your liberty. These are your natural rights. So, and the very establishment of state is there particularly because to take care of your or to ensure your natural rights. And we find most important theorist here, John Locke. And if you look at the theory of John Locke and his theory of two treatises of civil government, he argues that in the state of nature everything was so fine, it was almost a heaven, and there was natural law. But why we came to this creation of state? Because some people were greedy, and because of this some people were losing natural rights. So in order to ensure natural rights to everyone, the contract was primarily among the people in order to form a civil society. Then it was between political society or state and civil society. So these are two contracts. Now, if the state or the political society is the party in order to maintain the natural rights in the state of nature, how can they violate the very important thing why we came into the creation of state, that is the natural rights? So legally, or if you go by the jurisprudence, the philosophy of law, John Locke argue that the state being a party of this contract cannot violate the contract itself, that is protection of natural rights. Now one confusion is there. Some people often argue that Thomas Hobbes is also an advocate of natural rights. But we need to understand, yes, Thomas Hobbes extensively talked about and discussed and analyzed natural rights, but he was not an advocate of natural rights. He said that in state of nature, people were there, everyone had every kind of rights, even right over other people's body. Simply speaking, anyone could kill others. It's basically the idea of the powerful can conquer everything. But he argued in such a manner in order to justify his argument that state possesses every right to dominate or control individual life. That is, he talked about authoritarian state. Now, if he talked about authoritarian state and he justified his understanding of natural rights through the prism of power, how can we conclude that Thomas Hobbes was an advocate of natural rights? So please keep it in mind that yes, Thomas Hobbes extensively talked about natural rights, but he was not a champion or not an advocate of natural rights. Rather, Thomas Paine, being he was not a believer of social contract theory. He did not argue that natural rights are there because of the social contract, but he was a very important advocate of natural rights. He argued that in a society, if a state do not allow its own people to pursue whatever they want to be, that is natural rights, they are maybe biologically men or biologically human being, but they are not actually human being. They are less than a human. Because you see, animal kingdom, a lion is destined to be a lion, a tiger is destined to be a tiger. But a man, if he is not provided the external environment, the conditions that we call right, how can he become a individual or a human being ultimately? So Thomas Paine argues that it's not about the social contract, but it's about the full-fledged well-being of the society and the individual. That's why we need these natural rights. But nevertheless, these natural rights are not beyond flaws. There are multiple flaws that have been pointed out by the critics of the natural rights, and they primarily argue that who defines what is natural. And actually, there is no definition of natural. And on the other side, they argue that this conflict, the instinct of animus dominandi, that instinct that talks about conquer others' property, kill others, dominate others, all these things are natural. Our animal instinct is nothing but natural. Look at state. State is nothing but natural in that way. It has come through a development or a overall gradual development of human civilization. So how can we say that state is not natural and state is a unnecessary hindrance towards people's right? So some people, on the other hand, they argue that yes, natural rights are, we can conclude on the basis of common sense. Now, here again, there is a debate that how do you come to a conclusion that what is common sense? And often we find that common sense are not really common in everyone. So, on the basis of the subjective idea of common sense, we cannot define something natural right. Next question is, or next criticism, next major point against natural rights is who protects, if there is any natural rights, who protect it? If there is no state, there is no protection of right. And they argue that was natural rights better protected in the state of nature or in the state? And they argue from the very logic of John Locke, that it was John Locke himself who argued that people they went for the state instead of the state of nature in order to protect natural rights. So isn't it state who takes care of the natural rights better than the state of nature? Next point is, these are not pragmatic things. I mean, you cannot objectively define what is natural rights. And you see, legal institutional approach talks about that rights are not just some conditions, these are rather some actions. So the criticism against the natural law is, you are talking about conditions are fine, but how to in everyday life pragmatically experience it, how to transform this abstract metaphysical idea of right into an action oriented right. This is a very important criticism against natural right. Yes, we have no denial of, we cannot deny this fact that these are universally accepted lofty ideas, these are excellent philosophies, these have deterred the arbitrariness of the states in different times, in pre-modern times and others. But the point is, we cannot experience it meticulously, objectively, specifically in a daily life. Now we'll talk about legal rights and the basic understanding of legal rights. The criticism against natural rights was basically the foundation stone for the legal rights activist. But here we should understand that Marshall's understanding of types of rights, where he talked about civil rights, political rights, and socio-economic rights, we should not equate that typology or that kind of understanding of civil rights, we should not equate with legal rights. Legal rights are approach, it's a specific approach to the conception of right. Here we are talking about legally justifying right. If there is no law, there is no rights. Whereas in Marshall's understanding of civil rights, he talked about civil rights are voting, taking part in election, taking part in the policy formulation. These are, he talked about civil rights. But here, when we talk about legal rights, it's all about all rights that can be legally implemented or justifiable. We must start with this note. Now, in the second part of the 18th century or on the 19th century, the theorists like John Austin or David Hume, they were harsh critique of the natural rights theory. And they argued that it is most important to transform the idea of rights into daily practice, or it should be action oriented. The metaphysical understanding of rights are okay, but it's more about how we experience it in daily life. So let us talk about the application of rights rather than the justification, why it came, how it came philosophically. So their point was natural rights are useless if it is not backed by law, and it is repetitive it is backed if it is backed by law. So natural rights are not that important according to the legal rights advocates. These legal rights advocates gets their most philosophical input from the monistic theory of sovereignty. That monistic theory of sovereignty, in a nutshell, argues that state possesses every power or all the power to formulate law, to implement law, and law is nothing but the manifestation of state's will. On the other hand, the only source of law is state. We can support it, we can oppose it, but this is what they understood, this is what they meant. On the other hand, pluralists, they disagreed with this particular approach, and they said that along with state, there are many other institutions in the society who contributes towards the formation of law, and state is one of them. So in this particular debate of legal rights, we find the opposition from the pluralists like Lasky, and the supporters are David Hume and John Austin, as I have already referred. So let us first talk about how legal rights advocates, they considered or they approached the notion of right. They started with this approach that right is only there when it is approved, implemented by the state. If there is no state, there is no right. And if there is a chaos or if there is anarchy, there cannot be any right. And rights are only there when state approves it. They do not accept this argument that all individuals are born with rights. No, they do not accept it. Rights are born with the state. That is their argument, and that is why the natural rights advocates and the advocates of legal rights primarily differ. Their approach to the origin of right are very, very different. In this case, they argue that rights are specific and confined within a state. You cannot accept the same right in Pakistan and in India, in USA or in Iran, in Britain or in France. These are specific product of a state. So unlike the universalist approach of natural rights, they do not accept it. They rather argue that this is the law of the land. Only if it is approved by the state, you can meaningfully enjoy right. Otherwise, this is meaningless talks, or these are some actions against the state. And if there is no law, there is no right. On the other hand, they argue that law and rights, these are two different manifestations, basically something one. They are integrally one. And rights are embedded on law. If law does not permit you to do something, this is illegal and that is not right. And if it permits you to do something, that is legal and you can enjoy it. Otherwise, these are some actions against the state, these are rebellion, and your action will be legally dealt with, and it will be, the state will crack down upon you. And if state cracks down upon you, how can we consider this is the state? This is right. So with this, we can come to the next debate, that is the idea of right to resistance, the debate on right to resistance. On one hand, the natural rights advocates, they started with this point that natural rights are the primary thing for which we formed state. So an important question of right to resistance is there in the debate between natural rights and legal rights. Whereas the advocates of natural rights like John Locke argued that the natural rights was the basis of contract. Why we came into the formation of the state? Because we wanted to protect the natural rights. And who were the parties? On one side, civil society, the people; on the other side, the state or the political society. So the state is bound to abide by or to protect the natural rights. And if they fail to protect, or they decide not to protect, they decide to regulate or restrict or choke individual rights, Locke was of the opinion that every individual or the society, they have every right to go against the state. That is what he called right to resistance. But legal rights advocates argue there is no question of right to resistance. Any question or any action against the state is basically futile, particularly because you are getting whatever rights you have in the society from the state. So state being the protector of rights, how can you have rights against someone who is giving you all rights? So if you assert or apply your right against the sources of rights, you will lose all the rights. The idea is, it's like a Frankenstein. If you kill kill the source, then you cannot get the fruits of that right. So according to legal rights advocates, you cannot have any right against the state, or right to resistance they disapprove, not only in order to support any kind of authoritarianism, they philosophically deny it on the question that since it is the source of the rights, if you violate that source, if you choke that particular source, you cannot have any further right in the society anymore. So in order to take care of your all rights, you should better abide by the instructions or whatever rights you are given by the state. Now, these legal rights also have some flaws. We cannot really believe that, or we do not, of course, argue that legal rights are beyond flaws. Most important argument against the legal rights advocates is by Lasky, a very prominent pluralist theorist, who argued that how can state decide, or how can the state be considered as the sole source of rights, because state do not give you rights are not from the state, these are pre-political, and since this is pre-political, the sources of rights are society, religion, and many other institutions, conventions, some practices, social practices. So state is there only to approve it. Say for example, Jallikattu, or take the example of firecrackers in the Diwali. What is the argument of if you go by the argument of the legal rights advocates, they will say that unless state permits you to go for this kind of festivals or this kind of this way of celebration, you can celebrate it, or else you'll be behind bars. On the other hand, pluralists argue that fine, you can approve or disapprove it, you can take legal actions, but this is not to mean that Jallikattu was, or the firecrackers in Diwali was basically started with the permission of the state. These were practiced before the formation of the modern state in India per se, or in any society. State is not the creator of rights. They are nothing but the custodian or protectors, or they approve rights. They do not give you right. There are many restrictions on the people, on the individuals by non state actors as well. Say, for example, we abide by some norms which may not be restricted by law or by the state, but we somehow think that these practices are immoral, and that sense of morality is not wasted in the state laws, rather they are originated in, maybe in religion. Neither the state gives all rights, nor it can restrict all your rights, because if you see the individual life, these are restricted by, these are shaped by many other sources in the society. Say, for example, religion, it also gives us some idea, some broad uh, line what we should do and what we should not do. Something in the society may be very heinous according to religion and not a crime according to state. In many cases, we follow the religious practices and we do not get into the political debate whether state is allowing it or not. There are some conventions which we follow and we shape our life, and we restrict willingly our rights, and these are absolutely okay with us, but state does not intervene into it. So the point is, the state neither gives you right nor it can always restrict your right. It is just approving or disapproving some practice that we can call rights. In conclusion, we can talk about the reconciliation, if it is possible, between natural rights and legal rights. It's not really about which one is prior or which one is better, whether natural rights are really meaningful or not. Of course, natural rights has immense impact in the history of human civilization, in the growth of political philosophy. On the other hand, we cannot deny the points raised by the legal rights advocates that yes, this is true, that if it is not backed by law, then what is the utility of that particular natural rights? These are lofty words, these are universalist approaches, that is fine, but how to implement it? That is the important question. So rather than getting into the conflict, we should attempt, or we should try to understand that if these can be reconciliated or not. And there are instances in history that natural rights have been backed by law, and that is the process of reconciliation. If natural rights, the lofty, excellent ideas can be legalized, backed by law, protected by the state, then nothing like that. In the 1776, the American Declaration of Independence, if we see, the idea of natural rights are upheld. So these life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is reflecting there. If we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is also taking care of the people's life, their dignity, their meaningful life, not just life, the meaningful life is being taken care of. If we even look at India's constitution, we are in fundamental rights, and in different sections of India's constitution, we are taking care of the principles and values that we fought for in the freedom struggle. In the directive principles sections, in the fundamental rights section, all these values are being protected and reflected. So it's not really about, we can finally conclude that it's not really about the conflict between these two approaches rather than all about reconciling them. Thank you.